Who earned the title of the greatest knight who ever lived? What kind of man could serve 5 English kings and remain trusted by all? The answer is William Marshal, and his story is one of the most remarkable journeys in all of history. Let us begin by stepping back in time. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself in the year 1146. The world is a very different place. There are no cars, no phones, no electricity. People travel on horseback or on foot. News spreads slowly, carried by messengers across muddy roads and through dense forests. Kings and queens rule over lands, and beneath them a complex web of lords, barons and knights hold society together. This is the medieval world. This is the world of feudalism, and at the heart of this world stands the figure of the knight. A knight in the 12th century was not simply a soldier. A knight was something more. He was a warrior, yes, trained from childhood in the arts of combat, but he was also expected to be a gentleman. He was expected to uphold certain values. These values would later come to be known as chivalry. Chivalry was a code of conduct. It told knights how they should behave. A true knight was supposed to be brave in battle. He was supposed to be loyal to his lord. He was supposed to protect the weak and the innocent. He was supposed to be generous and courteous. He was supposed to keep his word, no matter what. Now, not every knight lived up to these ideals. Many knights were cruel, many were greedy, many broke their oaths when it suited them. But the ideal of chivalry remained powerful. It shaped how people thought about knighthood. It shaped what they expected from their warriors. And when we speak of knights who truly lived by this code, one name rises above all others. That name is William Marshal. William Marshal would come to embody everything that chivalry stood for. He would be brave beyond measure. He would be loyal to a fault. He would serve his lords with absolute dedication. And he would do all of this while rising from almost nothing to become one of the most powerful men in England. But before we can understand William Marshal, we must understand the world he was born into. We must understand what it meant to be a knight in 12th century England and France. The training of a knight began early. A boy of noble birth might be sent away from home at the age of 7 or 8. He would go to live in the household of another lord. There he would begin his education. At first the boy would serve as a page. A page was essentially a servant, but a servant in training. He would learn manners. He would learn how to behave in a noble household. He would learn to serve at table, to care for horses, and to handle weapons in a basic way. As the boy grew older, perhaps around the age of 14, he would become a squire. A squire was a knight in training. He would serve a particular knight, helping him with his armour, caring for his horses, and learning the arts of war by observation and practice. A squire would learn to ride. This was essential. A knight fought on horseback, and his skill with a horse could mean the difference between life and death. The squire would learn to control his mount with his knees, leaving his hands free for weapons. A squire would learn to fight with sword and lance. He would practice against wooden targets, called quintains. He would spar with other squires. He would build the strength and skill he would need in real combat. And if the squire proved himself worthy, if he showed courage and skill and loyalty, he would eventually be made a knight. This was done through a ceremony called dubbing. The young man would kneel before a lord or a king. He would receive a blow on the shoulder with a sword, and he would rise as a knight ready to serve. But becoming a knight was only the beginning. A knight needed to prove himself. He needed to show his worth on the battlefield and in the tournament. Tournaments were a central part of knightly culture in the 12th century. These were not the jousting matches you might picture from later periods, with knights charging at each other with lances in a controlled setting. The tournaments of William Marshal's time were far more chaotic and dangerous. A tournament in the 12th century was essentially a mock battle. Two teams of knights would gather on a large field, sometimes covering miles of countryside. At a signal, they would charge at each other. The fighting was real. The weapons were real. Knights could be injured or killed. The goal was to capture opponents. A captured knight would have to pay a ransom to be released. He might have to give up his horse and armour. A successful tournament fighter could become wealthy from ransoms. A unsuccessful one could lose everything. These tournaments were where knights made their reputations. A knight who fought well in tournaments would become famous. Lords would want him in their service. Other knights would respect him. He would rise in status and wealth. And no one, in all the history of medieval tournaments, was more successful than William Marshal. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Before William Marshal became the greatest tournament champion of his age, before he became the trusted advisor of kings, before he became the regent of England, he was just a boy born into a world of chaos and violence, a boy who nearly died before his life truly began. The year was 1146. England was in the grip of a terrible civil war. This conflict would come to be known as the Anarchy. The Anarchy had begun in 1135 when King Henry I died. Henry had been a strong king, but he had a problem. His only legitimate son had drowned in a shipwreck. Henry wanted his daughter Matilda to succeed him. He made his barons swear to support her, but when Henry died, many of those barons broke their oaths. They supported Stephen of Blois instead. Stephen was Henry's nephew. He was a man, and many barons preferred a male ruler. Stephen seized the throne. Matilda did not accept this. She had supporters of her own. And so began a long and brutal civil war. For nearly 20 years, England was torn apart. Stephen and Matilda fought for control. Barons switched sides whenever it suited them. Castles changed hands. Villages were burned. The common people suffered terribly. It was into this chaos that William Marshal was born. William's father was John Marshal. John was a minor noble, not a great lord, but a man of some importance. He held the hereditary office of Marshal of the King's Horses. This was a position in the royal household responsible for the king's stables and transportation. It was not the highest office, but it was respectable. John Marshal was a survivor. During the Anarchy, he switched sides multiple times, always trying to be on the winning side. He was not a man of great honour. He was pragmatic. He did what he needed to do to protect his lands and his family. John had several children. William was not the eldest. He was probably the fourth son. This was important. In medieval society, the eldest son inherited everything. Younger sons had to make their own way in the world. They might enter the church. They might seek service with a great lord. They might try to marry wealthy widows or heiresses. William Marshal, as a younger son, would have to earn his place in the world. He could not rely on inheritance. He would have to prove himself through his own efforts. We do not know much about William's mother. Her name was Sybil. She was the sister of the Earl of Salisbury. This connection to a great noble family was important. It meant that William had relatives in high places, relatives who might help him later in life. William's early childhood was spent in the shadow of war. The Anarchy raged on. His father John was deeply involved in the fighting, and when William was about 5 or 6 years old, something happened that would mark him for life. It was the year 1152. King Stephen was besieging a castle held by John Marshal. The castle was called Newbury. John was inside, defending it against the king's forces. Stephen offered John a deal. If John would surrender the castle, Stephen would spare him and his men. John asked for time to consider. Stephen agreed, but he demanded a hostage to ensure that John would keep his word. John gave him his youngest son. That youngest son was William. So there was little William, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, taken from his father and handed over to the king's men. He was a hostage. His life depended on his father keeping his word. But John Marshal did not keep his word. Instead of surrendering, he used the time to strengthen his defences. He sent for reinforcements. He prepared to continue fighting. When Stephen learned of this betrayal, he was furious. His advisers told him to execute the boy. They said he should hang little William from a tree in sight of the castle walls. That would teach John Marshal a lesson. Stephen brought William before the castle. He showed the boy to the defenders on the walls. He threatened to kill the child if John did not surrender. John Marshal's response has become legendary. He shouted down from the walls that he did not care about the boy. He said he still had the hammer and the anvil to make more sons. It was a shocking thing to say. It was cold and cruel, but it was also, perhaps, a calculated gamble. John may have believed that Stephen would not actually kill a child. He may have been calling the king's bluff. And he was right. Stephen did not kill William. The king looked at the little boy and could not bring himself to do it. According to the stories, Stephen even grew fond of William during his time as a hostage. He played games with the boy. He treated him kindly. Eventually the siege ended without the castle being taken. William was returned to his family. But the experience must have left a mark on him. He had learned at a very young age that life was uncertain. He had learned that even his own father might sacrifice him. He had learned that survival depended on luck and on the mercy of others. Perhaps this experience shaped the man William would become. Perhaps it taught him the importance of loyalty, because he had experienced what it felt like to be abandoned. Perhaps it made him determined to be a man of honour, because he had seen what dishonour looked like. We cannot know for certain, but we can say that William Marshal survived. And surviving in the chaos of the Anarchy was no small thing. The Anarchy finally ended in 1153. Stephen and Matilda reached an agreement. Stephen would remain king for the rest of his life, but Matilda's son Henry would succeed him. When Stephen died the following year, Henry became King Henry II. Henry II was a strong and capable king. He restored order to England. He rebuilt the royal authority that had crumbled during the Anarchy. He created a legal system that would shape English law for centuries. He ruled not only England, but also vast territories in France, including Normandy, Anjou, and later Aquitaine, through his marriage to Eleanor. This was the world that William Marshal would grow up in. The chaos of his early childhood gave way to a more stable realm, and as William grew older, he began his training to become a knight. William was sent to Normandy, to the household of William de Tancarville. Tancarville was a great lord, a relative of William's mother. He was also the hereditary chamberlain of Normandy, an important position. His household was a place where young men came to learn the arts of war and the ways of nobility. In Tancarville's household, William would have learned everything a knight needed to know. He would have learned to ride and fight. He would have learned manners and courtesy. He would have learned to serve his betters and to command those beneath him. William was not a scholar. He never learned to read or write. This was not unusual for a knight of his time. Literacy was for clerks and priests. A knight needed to know how to fight, not how to read. But William was intelligent. He had a sharp mind and a good memory. He could think quickly in a crisis. And he had something else, something that would serve him well throughout his life. He had charm. People liked William Marshal. They trusted him. They wanted to be around him. This gift for making friends and winning trust would prove just as valuable as his skill with a sword. The years passed. William grew from a boy into a young man. He trained hard, he learned his craft, and finally, the day came when he was ready to be made a knight. We do not know the exact date of William's knighting. It was probably around 1166, when he was about 20 years old. The ceremony would have been solemn and meaningful. William would have knelt before his lord. He would have received the blow on his shoulder. He would have risen as a knight, ready to prove himself in the world. But being a knight was one thing. Being a successful knight was another. William had no lands, he had no wealth. He had only his skill and his reputation, and his reputation was not yet made. It was time for William Marshal to enter the tournament circuit. It was time for him to show the world what he could do. The tournaments of 12th century France were the proving grounds of knighthood. Knights came from all over to compete. They came for glory. They came for wealth. They came to make their names. William Marshal threw himself into this world, and he discovered that he had a gift for it. His first tournament did not go well. William was young and inexperienced. He made mistakes. He was captured and had to be ransomed. It was a humbling beginning, but William learned from his failures. He studied his opponents, he improved his technique, and soon he began to win. The key to success in tournaments was not just fighting skill, it was also tactics. A clever knight would wait for the right moment to strike. He would let others tire themselves out, then move in for the capture. He would work with teammates to surround and overwhelm opponents. William Marshal became a master of these tactics. He formed partnerships with other knights. He developed strategies. He learned when to fight and when to wait. And he was physically gifted as well. William was tall and strong. He had long arms, which gave him an advantage with a sword. He was quick and agile on horseback. He could fight for hours without tiring. The victories began to pile up. William captured knight after knight. He collected ransoms. He won horses and armour. He went from being a penniless young knight to being a wealthy and famous champion. The stories of his exploits spread. People began to talk about this William Marshal, this young knight from England who was dominating the tournament circuit. Lords took notice. They wanted this rising star in their service. One story from this period shows both William's skill and his character. After a particularly successful tournament, William could not be found. His companions searched for him. They finally discovered him in a blacksmith's shop. William had his head on the anvil. The blacksmith was working to remove his helmet. During the fighting, William's helmet had been battered and dented so badly that he could not get it off. He had been trapped in it since the battle ended. This story tells us something important. William Marshal did not hang back during tournaments. He did not play it safe. He was in the thick of the fighting, taking blows as well as giving them. His success came not from caution, but from courage. The tournament circuit took William all over France. He fought in Normandy, in Anjou, in Maine, in Champagne. He became known in every great household. His name was spoken with respect. And then came the opportunity that would change his life forever. William Marshal was invited to join the household of the young King Henry. This was an extraordinary honour. The young king was the eldest son of Henry II. He had been crowned during his father's lifetime, a practice meant to ensure a smooth succession. Though he had no real power while his father lived, the young king maintained his own household, his own court, his own knights. And now William Marshal would be one of those knights. He would serve the heir to the throne of England. He would be at the centre of power. This was the beginning of a new chapter in William's life. He had proven himself in the tournaments. Now he would prove himself in the service of kings. The Holy Land, Jerusalem, the most sacred place in Christendom. For medieval Christians, there was no more important destination on earth. Jerusalem was where Jesus had lived and died. It was where he had been crucified and buried. It was where he had risen from the dead. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, built over the site of his tomb, was the holiest shrine in the Christian world. For nearly a century, Jerusalem had been in Christian hands. The First Crusade, launched in 1096, had captured the city in 1099. A Christian kingdom had been established there, the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Pilgrims from all over Europe came to pray at the holy sites. But the Christian hold on the Holy Land was always precarious. The Crusader states were surrounded by Muslim powers. They were constantly under threat. And in 1187, just a few years after William Marshal's pilgrimage, Jerusalem would fall to Saladin. But when William set out in 1183 or 1184, Jerusalem was still in Christian hands. The holy sites were still accessible to pilgrims, and William had a sacred duty to perform. The journey to the Holy Land was long and dangerous. William would have travelled overland through France, and then taken a ship across the Mediterranean. The voyage could take weeks or even months, depending on the weather and the route. We do not have detailed accounts of William's journey. The sources tell us that he went, that he fulfilled his vow, that he laid the young king's cloak on the Holy Sepulchre, but they do not give us the day-to-day details. What we do know is that William spent about 2 years in the Holy Land. This was longer than a simple pilgrimage would require. It suggests that William did more than just visit the holy sites. He may have fought for the Crusader states. He may have participated in the defence of the Christian territories. The Crusader states were always in need of skilled knights. They faced constant pressure from their Muslim neighbours. A warrior of William Marshal's calibre would have been welcomed with open arms. There is evidence that William formed a connection with the Knights Templar during his time in the Holy Land. The Templars were a military religious order founded to protect pilgrims travelling to Jerusalem. They were elite warriors dedicated to the defence of the Holy Land. William admired the Templars. He respected their discipline and their devotion, and he made a promise to them. He vowed that when he died, he would be buried as a Templar. He would take their vows on his deathbed and be laid to rest in their habits. This was a significant commitment. The Templars were one of the most prestigious orders in Christendom. To be buried as one of them was a great honour, and William would keep this promise decades later at the end of his life. William's time in the Holy Land also gave him a broader perspective on the world. He saw lands and peoples very different from those he knew in England and France. He experienced a different culture, a different climate, a different way of life. This experience may have shaped his later career. William Marshal was known for his wisdom and his judgment. He was known for seeing the bigger picture, for understanding the consequences of actions. Perhaps his time in the Holy Land contributed to this wisdom. Eventually, William's pilgrimage came to an end. He had fulfilled his vow to the young king. He had honoured his promise. Now it was time to return home. But what awaited him there? The young king was dead. William had no lord to serve. He had no lands, no position, no clear future. He was a famous knight, yes, but fame alone would not feed him or give him a place in the world. William Marshal returned to England in 1186. He was about 40 years old. He had spent his entire adult life in service to others. He had won glory and renown, but he had little to show for it in material terms. Everything was about to change. When William Marshal returned from the Holy Land, he found England much changed. The young king was dead. His brother Richard was now the heir to the throne, and King Henry II, ageing and weary, was struggling to hold his empire together. Henry II had been a great king. He had restored order after the Anarchy. He had built a powerful legal system. He had ruled over a vast domain stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. But Henry's later years were troubled. His sons were impatient for power. They rebelled against him, again and again. His wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, had supported their rebellions. Henry had imprisoned her for it. And now, as Henry grew older, the conflicts with his sons intensified. Richard, the new heir, was allied with King Philip of France. Together, they were putting pressure on Henry, demanding concessions, threatening war. Into this troubled situation came William Marshal, and Henry II recognised his worth. Henry knew William's reputation. He knew that William had been the finest knight in the young king's household. He knew that William was loyal, capable, and trustworthy, and Henry needed men like that. The king took William into his service. He gave William lands and income. He made William one of his closest advisers. After years of wandering and uncertainty, William finally had a secure position. But serving Henry II in these final years was not easy. The king was under constant pressure. His health was failing. His sons were circling like wolves. William proved his worth again and again. He was a voice of calm and reason in a chaotic court. He gave good advice. He carried out difficult missions. He remained loyal when others wavered. The crisis came in 1189. Richard and Philip of France launched a major offensive against Henry. They captured castle after castle. They drove Henry back, forcing him to flee from one stronghold to another. William Marshal was with Henry throughout this desperate retreat. He fought to protect his king. He led rearguard actions, buying time for Henry to escape. And then came one of the most famous moments in William's life. Henry was fleeing from the city of Le Mans. Richard was in pursuit. The two forces came close to each other. William was covering Henry's retreat. Richard came charging forward, eager to catch his father. He was not wearing full armour. He had no lance. He was vulnerable. William saw his chance. He could have killed Richard right there. He could have ended the rebellion with a single blow. Richard was the enemy. He was trying to destroy Henry, and he was within William's reach. William charged at Richard. The prince saw him coming. Richard cried out that William should not kill him, that it would be wrong. William could have ignored the plea. He could have struck Richard down, but he did not. Instead, William drove his lance into Richard's horse. The animal fell. Richard tumbled to the ground, unhurt but unable to pursue. William had spared the prince's life. He had shown mercy to his enemy, and he had saved his king, at least for the moment. Why did William spare Richard? Perhaps he could not bring himself to kill the son of his king. Perhaps he thought that killing Richard would only make things worse. Perhaps he simply acted on instinct, following the code of chivalry that said a knight should not kill an unarmed opponent. Whatever his reasons, William's decision would have enormous consequences. Richard would remember this moment. He would remember that William Marshal had held his life in his hands and had let him live. But the mercy shown to Richard could not save Henry. The old king was broken. His health was failing. His allies were deserting him. He was forced to surrender to Richard and Philip. The terms were humiliating. Henry had to acknowledge Richard as his heir. He had to pay homage to Philip. He had to give up castles and territories. And then the final blow. Henry was given a list of the barons who had betrayed him, who had switched sides to join Richard. At the top of the list was a name that broke his heart. John. John was Henry's youngest son. He was Henry's favourite. The king had always doted on him, had always protected him, had always hoped that John, at least, would remain loyal. But John had betrayed him too. Every single one of Henry's sons had turned against him. Every single one had chosen ambition over family. Every single one had broken his heart. Henry looked at that list. He saw John's name, and something inside him shattered. The old king turned his face to the wall. He muttered words that would echo through history. He said, "Now let all things go as they will. I care no more for myself or for the world." Henry II died on July 6th, 1189. He was 56 years old. He died broken and bitter, abandoned by his sons, stripped of his dignity. One of the greatest kings England had ever known ended his days in misery and despair. William Marshal was there at the end. He remained loyal to Henry when almost everyone else had fled. He stayed by the king's side as Henry breathed his last. And when it was over, William performed one final service for his fallen lord. Someone had to prepare Henry's body for burial. Someone had to dress him in royal robes and place a crown upon his head. But almost all of Henry's servants had deserted. There was hardly anyone left. William Marshal took on this duty himself. He dressed the dead king. He made Henry presentable for burial. It was a humble task, a servant's task, but William did it without complaint. He honoured his king in death as he had served him in life. Henry was buried at Fontevraud Abbey, in the heart of his French domains. His tomb can still be seen there today, alongside those of his wife, Eleanor, and his son, Richard. And now William Marshal faced an uncertain future once again. He had served Henry faithfully. He had fought against Richard. He had nearly killed the new king. What would happen to him now? Richard arrived at Fontevraud to see his father's body. William was there, waiting. The tension must have been unbearable. William had every reason to fear for his life. Richard approached him. The new king looked at the man who had unhorsed him, who had held his life in his hands, and Richard spoke. He reminded William of what had happened at Le Mans. He reminded William that William could have killed him. He asked William why he had not done so. William answered simply. He said that he had not intended to kill Richard. He had only intended to stop him. He said that he could have killed Richard if he had wanted to. He was skilled enough to have driven that lance through Richard's body instead of through his horse, but he had chosen not to. Richard considered this answer, and then he did something remarkable. He forgave William. He said that he bore no grudge. He said that William had acted as a loyal knight should act, defending his lord to the last. Richard said that he admired such loyalty. He wanted men like William in his service. And then Richard went even further. He confirmed all the grants that Henry had made to William. He promised William the hand of Isabel de Clare, one of the richest heiresses in England. He made it clear that William would have a place of honour in the new reign. It was an extraordinary moment. William had served Richard's enemy. He had fought against Richard. He had nearly killed him. And yet Richard rewarded him. Why did Richard do this? Perhaps he genuinely admired William's loyalty. Perhaps he recognised that a man who'd been so faithful to Henry would be equally faithful to him. Perhaps he was simply being pragmatic, knowing that he needed capable men to help him rule. Whatever the reason, William Marshal's fortunes were about to soar to heights he had never imagined. Richard I, known to history as Richard the Lionheart, was one of the most famous kings England ever had. He was a warrior king, a crusader, a legend in his own time. Songs were sung about him. Stories were told about his courage and his prowess in battle. But Richard was also an absent king. Of the 10 years he reigned, he spent less than 6 months in England. His heart was elsewhere. His passion was for war, for crusade, for glory in distant lands. This would shape William Marshal's experience during Richard's reign. William would not spend much time with the king himself. Instead, he would manage his own affairs, build his own power, and help govern England while Richard was away. But first there was the matter of William's marriage. Isabel de Clare was one of the greatest prizes in England. She was the daughter of Richard de Clare, known as Strongbow, the famous conqueror of Ireland. When Strongbow died, Isabel inherited his vast estates. She held lands in England, Wales, Normandy, and Ireland. She was the Countess of Pembroke in her own right. Isabel was also young. She was probably about 17 years old when she married William. He was in his early 40s. It was a significant age gap, but such gaps were common in medieval marriages, especially when great estates were involved. The marriage took place in August of 1189, shortly after Richard became king. It was a splendid occasion befitting the union of two important people. With this marriage, William Marshal was transformed. He went from being a landless knight, dependent on the favour of kings, to being one of the greatest lords in England. He was now the Earl of Pembroke. He held castles and manors across multiple countries. He commanded the loyalty of hundreds of knights and thousands of common folk. It was an astonishing rise. William had started with nothing. He had been a younger son with no inheritance. He had been a hostage, nearly executed as a child. He had wandered the tournament circuit, living by his sword, and now he was an earl, one of the most powerful men in the realm. But William did not let his new status change him. He remained the same man he had always been. He was still loyal. He was still honourable. He was still dedicated to service. And he proved to be a good husband. William and Isabel had 10 children together, 5 sons and 5 daughters. Their marriage, which had begun as a political arrangement, seems to have become a genuine partnership. Isabel was a capable woman who managed their estates when William was away. She was his equal in many ways. The early months of Richard's reign were busy ones. The new king was preparing for a crusade. He had taken the cross years before, vowing to recapture Jerusalem from Saladin. Now he was determined to fulfill that vow. Richard threw himself into preparations. He raised money through every means possible. He sold offices and lands. He joked that he would sell London itself if he could find a buyer. He assembled a great army and a great fleet. In the summer of 1190, Richard departed for the Holy Land. He would be gone for years, and England would have to manage without him. Richard left the kingdom in the hands of regents. These were trusted men who would govern in his name. William Marshal was not the chief regent, but he was an important figure in the government. He was part of the council that ruled England. The years of Richard's absence were challenging ones. The king's brother John was ambitious and untrustworthy. He schemed and plotted, trying to increase his own power. He even attempted to seize the throne when Richard was imprisoned in Germany. William Marshal navigated these troubled waters carefully. He tried to maintain order. He tried to keep John in check. He tried to preserve the kingdom for Richard's return. It was a delicate balancing act. William had to be firm enough to prevent chaos, but not so aggressive that he provoked open conflict. He had to manage the competing interests of powerful barons. He had to deal with threats from France. He had to keep the machinery of government running. Through it all, William showed the qualities that had made him great. He was calm under pressure. He was fair in his judgments. He was respected by all sides. Even those who disagreed with him acknowledged his integrity. Richard's crusade was a mixed success. He won great victories, including the capture of Acre and the Battle of Arsuf. He came within sight of Jerusalem, but he never recaptured the Holy City. In the end, he made a truce with Saladin and began the journey home. That journey turned into a disaster. Richard was shipwrecked and forced to travel overland through hostile territory. He was captured by Duke Leopold of Austria, who handed him over to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI. Richard was held prisoner for over a year. The ransom demanded for Richard's release was enormous, 150,000 marks of silver. It was a staggering sum, equivalent to several years of royal income, England had to be squeezed dry to raise it. William Marshal contributed to the ransom. He helped organise the collection of funds. He remained loyal to Richard throughout the captivity, even as John tried to take advantage of the situation. Finally, in February of 1194, Richard was released. He returned to England briefly, then crossed to France to deal with the threats there. He would spend the rest of his reign fighting to defend his French territories. William saw Richard occasionally during these years. He served the king when called upon. He fought in Richard's wars, but mostly he focused on his own estates. William proved to be as capable a lord as he had been a knight. He managed his lands well. He built castles and founded towns. He developed his Irish properties, which had been neglected and chaotic. He brought order and prosperity wherever he went. The castle of Pembroke in Wales became one of William's great projects. He strengthened its defences. He expanded its walls. The great round keep that still stands today was built during William's time. It is a testament to his power and his vision. In Ireland, William faced even greater challenges. His lands there were wild and contested. The native Irish resisted English rule. Other English lords competed for territory. It was a frontier, a place of constant conflict. William approached Ireland with the same combination of strength and wisdom that characterised all his actions. He fought when he had to. He made peace when he could. He built alliances with some Irish chiefs while subduing others. He established towns and encouraged settlement. The town of New Ross in County Wexford was one of William's foundations. He built it as a port, a centre of trade. It grew and prospered under his guidance. It still exists today, a living legacy of William Marshal's time in Ireland. These years of estate management might seem less exciting than William's earlier adventures. There were no tournaments, no dramatic battles, no moments of high drama. But they were important years. They showed that William was more than just a fighter. He was a builder, a governor, an administrator. He could create as well as destroy. Richard the Lionheart died on April 6th, 1199. He was besieging a minor castle in France when he was struck by a crossbow bolt. The wound became infected. The greatest warrior of his age died from a single arrow, shot by an unknown defender. Richard had no legitimate children. The succession was uncertain. There were two possible heirs. One was John, Richard's younger brother. The other was Arthur of Brittany, the son of Richard's deceased brother Geoffrey. By strict rules of inheritance, Arthur might have had the better claim. He was the son of an older brother, while John was a younger brother. But Arthur was young, only 12 years old, and he was backed by the King of France, which made him suspect in English eyes. Richard, on his deathbed, named John as his heir, and William Marshal supported this choice. It was a fateful decision. John would prove to be one of the most controversial kings in English history. He would lose most of England's French territories. He would clash with his barons and with the church. He would be forced to sign Magna Carta. His reign would end in civil war. But all of that lay in the future. In 1199, William Marshal saw John as the rightful king. He gave John his loyalty, just as he had given it to Henry and to Richard before him. A new chapter was beginning, and it would test William Marshal as never before. King John has gone down in history as one of England's worst kings. He is remembered as a tyrant, a failure, a villain. Robin Hood legends cast him as the evil prince who oppresses the people while good King Richard is away. Shakespeare portrayed him as a weak and wicked ruler. But the truth about John is more complicated. He was not without ability. He was intelligent and energetic. He worked hard at the business of government. He understood law and administration. In some ways, he was more attentive to England than Richard had ever been. But John had fatal flaws. He was suspicious and paranoid. He trusted no one and was trusted by no one in return. He was cruel, capable of terrible acts of vengeance against those who crossed him. He was greedy, always demanding more money, more taxes, more fees. And he was unlucky, facing challenges that might have overwhelmed even a better king. William Marshal served John for 17 years. It was the most difficult service of his life. The reign began with a succession crisis. Arthur of Brittany, backed by King Philip of France, challenged John's right to the throne. War broke out immediately. At first John did well. He moved quickly, catching his enemies off guard. In 1199 he secured England and most of his French territories. Arthur's challenge seemed to be fading, but the war dragged on. Philip of France was a cunning and patient enemy. He probed for weaknesses. He exploited every mistake, and John made many mistakes. The worst came in 1202. John captured Arthur of Brittany during a military campaign. The young prince was imprisoned in the castle of Rouen, and then Arthur disappeared. No one knows exactly what happened to Arthur. The most likely explanation is that John had him murdered. Some accounts say that John killed Arthur himself, in a drunken rage. Others say that John ordered the killing and had others carry it out. Whatever the truth, Arthur's disappearance was a disaster for John. Rumours spread across Europe. John was branded a murderer, a killer of his own nephew. Many of his French vassals abandoned him, horrified by what he had done. Philip of France exploited the situation brilliantly. He declared John's French fiefs forfeit. He launched a massive invasion. And John, his support crumbling, could not stop him. By 1204, Normandy was lost. The duchy that had been in English hands since William the Conqueror, the homeland of the Norman kings, fell to France. Anjou, Maine, and most of the other French territories followed. It was a catastrophe. John had lost more than half of his inheritance. He had been humiliated. He had been driven out of lands that his family had held for generations. The English barons were furious. Many of them had held lands in Normandy, as well as in England. They had lost those lands because of John's failures. They blamed the king. They began to hate him. William Marshal was affected by these losses too. He held lands in Normandy that were now under French control. He faced a difficult choice. Should he give up those lands entirely, or should he do homage to Philip of France for them, becoming Philip's vassal as well as John's? William chose to do homage to Philip. This was not unusual. Many barons held lands in both kingdoms and owed allegiance to both kings. It was an accepted practice, but John did not see it that way. He was suspicious of anyone who had dealings with Philip. He began to distrust William. The relationship between king and earl, never warm, grew cold. The years that followed were tense ones. John demanded more and more from his barons. He imposed heavy taxes. He sold justice to the highest bidder. He took hostages from noble families to ensure loyalty. He punished those who displeased him with savage cruelty. William tried to navigate this dangerous environment. He gave John his loyalty, but he also tried to moderate the king's worst impulses. He spoke up for justice. He counselled restraint. He tried to be a voice of reason. John did not appreciate this. He saw William's advice as criticism. He saw William's independence as disloyalty. The king began to move against the earl. In 1205, the conflict came to a head. John demanded that William surrender his eldest son as a hostage. This was a common practice, a way for kings to ensure the loyalty of powerful subjects. But it was also a sign of distrust, a sign that John did not believe in William's faithfulness. William refused. He said that he had always been loyal. He said that his record of service spoke for itself. He said that he would not give up his son to a king who did not trust him. It was a bold stand. Few men dared to defy John so openly. But William was old now, in his 60s, and he had earned the right to speak his mind. He had served 4 kings. He had proven his loyalty 100 times over. He would not be treated like a suspect. John backed down for the moment. But the relationship was broken. William withdrew from court. He spent more time on his estates, especially in Ireland. He kept his distance from the king. The next few years were difficult ones. William was effectively in exile, far from the centre of power. He watched from afar as John's reign lurched from crisis to crisis. John quarrelled with the Pope over the appointment of the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Pope placed England under interdict, suspending all church services. Then the Pope excommunicated John himself, declaring him cut off from the Christian community. This was a serious matter. In the medieval world, excommunication was a terrible punishment. It meant that the king's soul was in danger. It meant that his subjects might be released from their oaths of loyalty. It gave John's enemies a powerful weapon against him. John eventually submitted to the Pope in 1213. He accepted the Pope's candidate for Archbishop. He even made England a fief of the papacy, holding his kingdom as a vassal of Rome. It was a humiliating climb down. But John's troubles were far from over. He was planning a great campaign to recover his lost French territories. He demanded money and men from his barons. He pushed them harder than ever before. The barons had had enough. They were tired of John's taxes. They were tired of his arbitrary justice. They were tired of his cruelty and his suspicion. They began to organise against him. In 1215, the crisis exploded. A group of barons renounced their allegiance to John. They demanded reforms. They demanded that the king respect their rights and privileges. They demanded a Charter of Liberties. This was the beginning of the process that would lead to Magna Carta. William Marshal was drawn back into the centre of events. He was too important, too respected, to remain on the sidelines. Both sides wanted his support. William chose to remain loyal to John. He believed in the principle of loyalty to the crown. He believed that rebellion was wrong, even against a bad king. He tried to mediate between John and the barons, to find a peaceful solution. The negotiations were difficult. The barons did not trust John. John did not want to give up any of his power. But eventually, under pressure from all sides, an agreement was reached. On June 15, 1215, at a meadow called Runnymede, beside the River Thames, King John set his seal to a document. That document was Magna Carta. Magna Carta was a Charter of Liberties. It set out the rights of the barons and the limits of royal power. It said that the king could not impose certain taxes without the consent of his barons. It said that no free man could be imprisoned or punished except by the law of the land. It said that justice could not be sold or delayed. William Marshal was one of the witnesses to Magna Carta. His name appears on the document among the king's loyal supporters. He had helped to bring about this agreement. He had helped to create one of the most important documents in the history of liberty. But the peace did not last. John had no intention of honouring Magna Carta. He had agreed to it only under duress. As soon as he could, he repudiated it. He got the Pope to annul it. He prepared for war against his barons. The barons, in turn, sought outside help. They invited Prince Louis of France, the son of King Philip, to come to England and take the throne. Louis accepted. He landed in England in May of 1216 with the French army. England was plunged into civil war. The First Barons' War had begun. John fought back with energy and determination. He marched across the country, attacking rebel strongholds. He showed flashes of the military ability that had sometimes served him well. But John's health was failing. The stress of the war, combined with years of excess, had taken its toll. In October of 1216, while crossing a tidal estuary called the Wash, John lost his baggage train. His treasure, his crown jewels, his royal regalia, all were swallowed by the rising waters. It was a symbolic disaster, a sign that John's luck had finally run out. A few days later, John fell ill. It may have been dysentery, it may have been something else. Whatever it was, it killed him quickly. King John died on October 18th, 1216. He was 49 years old. He died with his kingdom in chaos, half of it occupied by a French prince, his barons in rebellion, his legacy in ruins. And William Marshal, now 70 years old, was about to face the greatest challenge of his life. William Marshal faced death as he had faced everything else in his life, with courage and dignity. He did not rage against the dying of the light. He did not cling desperately to life. He accepted what was coming and prepared himself to meet it. William retired to his manor at Caversham, near Reading. It was a peaceful place beside the River Thames. There, surrounded by his family and his closest friends, he waited for the end. But first there were things to be done. William had always been a man of action. Even now, with death approaching, he could not simply lie still. He had to put his affairs in order. He had to make arrangements for his family. He had to fulfill the promises he had made. One of those promises was to the Knights Templar. Years before, during his pilgrimage to the Holy Land, William had vowed to die as a Templar. He had promised to take the vows of the order on his deathbed and to be buried in their habit. Now William fulfilled that promise. He summoned the master of the temple in England. He took the vows of the order. He put on the white mantle with the red cross that marked him as a Templar knight. It was a fitting end for a man who had dedicated his life to the ideals of chivalry. The Templars were the elite warriors of Christendom, the defenders of the Holy Land. By joining them, even at the last moment, William was affirming his commitment to those ideals. William also made arrangements for his burial. He asked to be buried in the Temple Church in London, the headquarters of the Templars in England. He wanted to lie among the knights of the order, among men who had shared his values and his dedication. The days passed slowly. William grew weaker. His family gathered around him. His wife Isabel was there. His sons and daughters were there. His closest companions and retainers were there. William spoke to them all. He gave advice. He distributed his possessions. He said his farewells. One story from these final days shows William's character. His knights asked him what would become of them after he was gone. They worried about their futures. They wondered who would protect them, who would provide for them. William reassured them. He said that he'd made arrangements. He said that they would be taken care of. He told them not to worry. But then one of the knights asked a more difficult question. He asked about William's own salvation. He pointed out that William had taken many things during his life, horses and armour and ransoms from defeated opponents. The knight suggested that William should give back some of these things, to make amends before he died. William's response was sharp. He said that if the clergy expected him to give back everything he had won, then they were asking too much. He said that he had won those things fairly, in honest combat. He said that he would not give them back, and if that meant he was damned, then so be it. It was a surprising answer from a man on his deathbed, but it was honest. William had lived his life by a certain code. He had fought and won according to the rules of his society. He was not going to repudiate all of that at the last moment, not even to save his soul. Or perhaps William was simply being realistic. He knew that the church's demands were impossible to meet. He knew that no knight could give back everything he had ever won. He chose to trust in God's mercy rather than in his own ability to make amends. William's final hours were peaceful. He was surrounded by those he loved. He received the last rites of the church. He made his final confession. And then on May 14th, 1219, William Marshal died. He was about 73 years old. He had served 5 kings. He had been a knight, a champion, an earl, a regent. He had saved England from invasion and civil war. He had lived one of the most remarkable lives in medieval history. William's body was carried to London. He was buried in the Temple Church just as he had requested. His tomb can still be seen there today, a stone effigy of a knight in armour lying in peaceful repose. The effigy shows William as he wished to be remembered. He is dressed as a knight with his sword at his side. His hands are clasped in prayer. His face is calm and dignified. He looks like what he was, the greatest knight of his age. William Marshal left behind more than just a tomb. He left behind a legacy that would endure for centuries. His immediate legacy was his family. William and Isabel had 10 children, 5 sons and 5 daughters. These children married into the greatest families of England and Europe. They spread William's bloodline across the continent. William's eldest son, also named William, inherited his father's titles and estates. He became the 2nd Earl of Pembroke. He continued his father's work, serving the crown and managing the family's vast properties. But the male line of the Marshal family did not last long. William's sons died one by one, without leaving male heirs of their own. By 1245, less than 30 years after William's death, all 5 of his sons were dead. The earldom of Pembroke passed to other families through William's daughters. This extinction of the male line was a tragedy for the family, but it also spread William's legacy more widely. His descendants through his daughters included many of the greatest families of medieval England. His blood ran through the veins of kings and queens. William's legacy was not just biological, it was also cultural. He became a symbol of chivalry, an example of what a knight should be. His story was told and retold, inspiring generations of warriors. The most important record of William's life is a remarkable document called the History of William Marshal. This is a biography, written in verse, composed shortly after William's death. It was commissioned by William's son and based on the memories of those who had known him. The History of William Marshal is an extraordinary source. It is the only biography of a medieval knight that has survived from this period. It gives us a detailed account of William's life, from his childhood to his death. It preserves stories and anecdotes that would otherwise have been lost. The history is not a modern biography. It does not try to be objective. It was written to glorify William, to celebrate his achievements, to hold him up as a model of knighthood. It glosses over his failures and emphasises his successes. But even with these limitations, the history is invaluable. It gives us a window into the world of medieval chivalry. It shows us what knights valued, what they aspired to, what they believed. It brings William Marshal to life in a way that no other source can. The history was lost for centuries. It survived in a single manuscript, which was rediscovered in the 19th century. Since then, it has been studied and translated, making William Marshal's story accessible to modern readers. William's legacy also lived on in the institutions he helped to create. Magna Carta, which William witnessed and reissued, became one of the foundational documents of English law. It established principles that would shape constitutional government for centuries. The idea that the king was not above the law, that even the monarch had to respect certain rights and procedures, was revolutionary. It did not come into being all at once. It took centuries to develop fully. But Magna Carta was a crucial step, and William Marshal played a role in making it happen. William's influence extended beyond England. His lands in Ireland helped to shape the development of that island. The towns he founded, the castles he built, the systems of governance he established, all left their mark on Irish history. Pembroke Castle, which William strengthened and expanded, still stands today. It is one of the finest medieval castles in Wales. Visitors can walk through its gates and climb its towers, standing where William once stood. The great round keep, built during William's time, remains an impressive monument to his power and vision. The town of New Ross, which William founded in Ireland, grew into an important port. It played a role in Irish commerce for centuries. Today, it is a thriving town, still bearing the imprint of its medieval origins. These physical remains are part of William's legacy. They remind us that he was not just a warrior, but also a builder. He created things that lasted. He left the world better than he found it. But perhaps William's greatest legacy is simply his example. He showed what was possible. He showed that a man could rise from nothing to greatness through courage, skill, and integrity. He showed that loyalty and honour were not just empty words, but principles worth living by. In an age of treachery and betrayal, William Marshal kept his word. In an age of cruelty and violence, he showed mercy to his enemies. In an age of greed and ambition, he served others before himself. He was not perfect. No one is. He made mistakes. He sometimes chose wrongly. He was a man of his time, with all the limitations that implies. But he was also something more. He was a man who tried to live by a code, who tried to be better than he had to be, who tried to uphold ideals that were larger than himself. That is why his story still matters. That is why, 800 years after his death, we still remember William Marshal. When William Marshal died in 1219, the world he had known was already changing. The age of chivalry, which had shaped his life, was beginning to evolve into something different. The 13th century would see great transformations. The power of kings would grow. The independence of barons would shrink. New forms of warfare would emerge. New ideas about government and society would take hold. But the ideals that William had embodied would not disappear. They would be transformed, adapted, passed down through generations. The code of chivalry would continue to influence European culture for centuries. Let us take a moment to consider the world that William left behind. Let us look at what happened to the people and places that had been part of his life. Young King Henry III, whom William had served as regent, grew into adulthood and took control of his kingdom. His reign was long and troubled. He faced rebellions and conflicts. He struggled with his barons, just as his father John had done. But Henry also achieved things. He rebuilt Westminster Abbey, creating the magnificent church that still stands today. He patronised the arts and learning. He maintained the peace that William had won, at least for a time. Henry's son, Edward I, would become one of England's greatest warrior kings. Edward conquered Wales and tried to conquer Scotland. He reformed English law and administration. He was everything that his grandfather John had failed to be. The descendants of William Marshal's daughters married into the royal family and the great noble houses. William's blood flowed through the veins of future kings and queens. His legacy became part of the fabric of English history. The Knights Templar, the order that William had joined on his deathbed, continued for another century. They remained powerful and wealthy, the bankers and warriors of Christendom. But in 1307, disaster struck the Templars. King Philip IV of France, greedy for their wealth, accused them of heresy and other crimes. He arrested the Templars in France and tortured them until they confessed. The Pope, under pressure from Philip, dissolved the order in 1312. The Templars' properties were seized. Their leaders were burned at the stake. The greatest military order of the Middle Ages was destroyed. The Temple Church in London, where William Marshal was buried, survived the destruction of the order. It passed into other hands and continued to serve as a place of worship. William's tomb remained there, undisturbed. During the Second World War, the Temple Church was badly damaged by German bombs. The roof collapsed. The interior was gutted by fire. Many of the medieval tombs were damaged. But William Marshal's effigy survived. It was restored after the war and can still be seen today. Visitors to the Temple Church can stand beside the tomb of the greatest knight who ever lived. Ireland, where William had held such extensive lands, continued on its troubled path. The English presence there grew and then contracted. Wars and conflicts shaped the island's history for centuries. William's town of New Ross remained an important centre. It would play a role in later Irish history, including the rebellion of 1798. The legacy of William Marshal lived on in the land he had helped to develop. Normandy, which William had known so well, remained in French hands. The English kings never recovered it. The connection between England and Normandy, which had lasted since William the Conqueror, was broken forever. But the influence of Norman culture on England endured. The English language absorbed thousands of French words. English law and government bore the stamp of Norman innovations. The castles and cathedrals that the Normans had built still dominated the landscape. The tournament culture that had made William famous gradually changed. The chaotic melees of William's time gave way to more organised jousts. The focus shifted from capture and ransom to display and spectacle. By the later Middle Ages, tournaments had become elaborate theatrical events. Knights competed in formal jousts, charging at each other with lances in controlled settings. The violence was reduced, but so was the opportunity for a poor knight to make his fortune. William Marshal could not have risen in this later world as he had risen in his own time. The tournaments of the 12th century had offered opportunities for talented men without wealth or connections. The tournaments of later centuries were more exclusive, more expensive, more closed to outsiders. The code of chivalry continued to evolve. It became more elaborate, more literary, more concerned with courtly love and romantic ideals. The practical warrior ethic of William's time gave way to something more refined and more artificial. But the core values remained: courage, loyalty, honour, service. These ideals continued to shape how people thought about knighthood. They continued to inspire men to strive for something higher than mere self-interest. And William Marshal remained the supreme example. When people spoke of the perfect knight, they spoke of him. When they wanted to illustrate what chivalry meant, they told his stories. The history of William Marshal, that remarkable biography written after his death, preserved his memory. It was copied and read. It influenced how people thought about knighthood. It kept William's example alive. Even when the history was lost, when the manuscript disappeared into obscurity, the memory of William Marshal endured. Other sources mentioned him. Other accounts praised him. His reputation survived, waiting to be rediscovered. For centuries, William Marshal was known mainly to specialists. Historians who studied medieval England knew his name. They recognised his importance, but the general public had largely forgotten him. The history of William Marshal, that invaluable biography, had been lost to view. It existed in a single manuscript, tucked away in a private collection. No one had published it, no one had translated it. Its treasures were inaccessible. This changed in the 19th century. Scholars began to take a new interest in medieval history. They searched archives and libraries for forgotten documents. They brought to light sources that had been neglected for generations. In 1861, a French scholar named Paul Meyer discovered the manuscript of the History of William Marshal. He recognised its importance immediately. Here was a detailed biography of a medieval knight written by someone who had known him, filled with stories and information found nowhere else. Meyer published the text in 1891 through 1894. For the first time, scholars could read the full account of William Marshal's life. They could study his career in detail. They could understand his world as never before. The publication of the history sparked new interest in William Marshal. Historians wrote about him. They analysed his career. They debated his significance. He became a subject of serious scholarly attention. But William Marshal remained largely unknown outside academic circles. The history was in Old French, a language that few people could read. The scholarly works about him were technical and specialised. The general public still had little access to his story. This began to change in the 20th century. Popular historians discovered William Marshal. They recognised that his life was not just historically important, but also genuinely exciting. Here was a story of adventure and achievement, of battles and tournaments, of loyalty and honour. It was a story that deserved to be told to a wider audience. Books about William Marshal began to appear for general readers. Authors told his story in accessible language. They brought his world to life for people who had never studied medieval history. One particularly influential book was written by the historian Sidney Paynter. His work, published in 1933, presented William Marshal's life in a scholarly but readable way. It introduced many readers to this remarkable figure. More recently, the historian Thomas Asbridge wrote a popular biography of William Marshal. Published in 2015, it brought William's story to a new generation of readers. It became a bestseller, proving that there was a wide audience hungry to learn about the greatest knight. These books and others like them have restored William Marshal to his rightful place in public memory. He is no longer a figure known only to specialists. He is recognised as one of the most remarkable individuals of the Middle Ages. Television documentaries have told his story. Historical novels have been written about him. His life has inspired fiction and drama. William Marshal has become, once again, a figure of popular fascination. This rediscovery has also led to new scholarly work. Historians have re-examined William's career with fresh eyes. They have asked new questions about his life and his world. They have placed him in broader contexts, connecting his story to larger themes in medieval history. The study of chivalry has been transformed by attention to figures like William Marshal. Scholars have moved beyond romantic myths to examine what knighthood actually meant in practice. They have looked at how knights really lived, how they really fought, how they really thought about honour and loyalty. William Marshal has been central to this work. His life provides a case study in medieval chivalry. His career shows both the ideals and the realities of knighthood. He is a window into a vanished world. The history of William Marshal has been translated into English, making it accessible to readers who do not know Old French. Modern editions have made the text available to anyone who wants to read it. The primary source for William's life is now within reach of ordinary readers. This accessibility has allowed people to encounter William Marshal directly, not just through the interpretations of historians. They can read the stories told by those who knew him. They can form their own impressions of his character and his achievements. The rediscovery of William Marshal is part of a larger trend. In recent decades, there has been growing interest in medieval history among the general public. People are fascinated by the Middle Ages. They want to learn about knights and castles, kings and queens, battles and crusades. This interest has been fed by popular culture. Movies and television shows set in the medieval period have attracted huge audiences. Fantasy literature, much of it inspired by medieval settings, has become enormously popular. Video games allow players to experience virtual versions of medieval worlds. William Marshal fits perfectly into this cultural moment. His life has all the elements that people find compelling about the Middle Ages. It has action and adventure. It has honour and loyalty. It has drama and conflict. It is a story that resonates with modern audiences. But William Marshal is not just entertainment. His life raises serious questions that are still relevant today. What does it mean to be loyal? How should we balance personal interest against duty to others? What makes a life well lived? These are questions that William Marshal grappled with throughout his career. His answers, expressed through his actions rather than his words, still have the power to inspire and challenge us. We have followed William Marshal through his long and eventful life. We have seen him as a child hostage, as a young knight, as a tournament champion, as a royal servant, as an earl, as a regent. We have watched him rise from nothing to the heights of power. We have witnessed his triumphs and his struggles. But who was William Marshal really? What kind of man was he? What made him different from the countless other knights of his time? Let us take some time to reflect on his character. Let us try to understand what made him great. The first thing that strikes us about William Marshal is his loyalty. This was the quality for which he was most famous in his own time. It was the quality that defined his career. William served 5 kings. He served them through good times and bad. He served them even when it was dangerous to do so. He served them even when they did not deserve his service. Think about what this meant in practice. William served King John, one of the most difficult and unpleasant monarchs in English history. John was suspicious, cruel, and treacherous. He made William's life miserable at times. He drove William into semi-exile. He treated him with distrust and disrespect, and yet William remained loyal. He did not join the rebellions against John. He did not switch sides when it would have been easy and profitable to do so. He stuck with his king, even a bad king, because he had given his word. This loyalty was not blind or stupid. William was not a man who followed orders without thinking. He gave advice. He spoke his mind. He tried to steer his kings toward wiser courses of action. But when his advice was rejected, William did not abandon his lords. He continued to serve, even when he disagreed. He believed that loyalty was a sacred obligation, not to be broken lightly. This kind of loyalty is rare. Most people in William's time and in ours are loyal only when it suits them. They stick with their commitments when things are going well. They abandon them when things get hard. William Marshal was different. His loyalty was unconditional. It did not depend on circumstances. It was a fixed point in a changing world. The second quality that defined William was his courage. He was a warrior, and warriors must be brave. But William's courage went beyond the ordinary. Remember the Battle of Lincoln. William was 70 years old. He had every excuse to hang back, to let younger men do the fighting. No one would have blamed him for staying out of the fray. But William led the charge himself. He was in the front rank, sword in hand, fighting like a man half his age. He risked his life when he did not have to. He led by example, showing his men that he would not ask them to do anything he would not do himself. This physical courage was matched by moral courage. William was not afraid to speak truth to power. He told kings things they did not want to hear. He stood up for what he believed was right, even when it was dangerous to do so. When King John demanded William's son as a hostage, William refused. He defied the king to his face. He risked everything rather than submit to what he saw as an unjust demand. This took tremendous courage. John was a vengeful man. He had destroyed others who had crossed him. William knew the risks. He defied John anyway. The third quality that marked William was his skill. He was simply better at fighting than almost anyone else. His success in tournaments was not luck. It was the result of natural talent, hard work, and intelligent tactics. William understood that fighting was not just about strength and aggression. It was about timing and positioning. It was about knowing when to attack and when to wait. It was about working with others, coordinating efforts, exploiting weaknesses. William brought this same skill to everything he did. He was a capable administrator. He was a shrewd politician. He was an effective diplomat. Whatever task he took on, he performed it well. This skill was not something William was born with. It was something he developed over a lifetime of practice and experience. He was always learning, always improving, always looking for ways to do things better. The fourth quality that distinguished William was his wisdom. He had good judgment. He understood people and situations. He knew how to navigate complex political waters. Consider how William handled the aftermath of John's death. England was in chaos. A French prince was claiming the throne. The barons were divided. The situation seemed hopeless. William could have tried to crush the rebels. He could have pursued a policy of revenge and punishment. Many of his allies wanted him to do exactly that. But William chose a different path. He offered generous terms. He reissued Magna Carta. He gave the rebels a way to come back to the king's side without losing face. This was wisdom. William understood that winning the war was not enough. He had to win the peace. He had to heal the kingdom, not deepen its divisions. He had to think about the long term, not just the immediate situation. The fifth quality that characterized William was his integrity. He was honest. He kept his word. He could be trusted. In a world full of liars and oath-breakers, this made William stand out. People knew that when William Marshal made a promise, he would keep it. When he gave his word, it was good. This integrity gave William enormous power. Kings trusted him because they knew he would not betray them. Enemies negotiated with him because they knew he would honour agreements. Everyone knew where they stood with William Marshal. The sixth quality that defined William was his humanity. Despite being a warrior, despite living in a violent age, William was not cruel. He showed mercy to his enemies. He treated people with respect. Remember how William spared Richard's life at Le Mans. He could have killed the prince. He chose not to. He chose mercy over vengeance. This humanity extended to how William treated those beneath him. He was kind to his servants and retainers. He looked after their welfare. He inspired loyalty because he was loyal in return. These qualities, taken together, made William Marshal who he was. Loyalty, courage, skill, wisdom, integrity, humanity. These were the pillars of his character. These were what made him the greatest knight. But we should not make William into a plaster saint. He was a real person with real flaws. He was ambitious. He wanted wealth and power. He pursued his own interests as well as those of his lords. William's marriage to Isabel de Clare was a calculated move. It brought him vast estates and elevated him to the highest ranks of the nobility. William did not marry for love. He married for advantage. There is nothing wrong with this. Medieval marriages were business arrangements. Everyone understood that. But it reminds us that William was practical as well as principled. He knew how the world worked, and he worked within it. William also accumulated great wealth through his tournament victories. He captured knights and took their ransoms. He won horses and armour. He built his fortune through violence, even if it was sanctioned violence. Again, this was normal for his time. Tournaments were how young knights made their way in the world. But it reminds us that William was not above material concerns. He cared about money and possessions, like everyone else. William's loyalty, too, had its limits. He did homage to the King of France for his Norman lands, even though this angered King John. He put his family's interests ahead of his king's preferences. Was this a betrayal? William did not think so. He believed he could serve two masters without compromising his loyalty to either. But John saw it differently. It was a reminder that even William's famous loyalty was not absolute. These complexities make William more interesting, not less. A perfect hero is boring. A real person, with strengths and weaknesses, with principles and compromises, is far more compelling. William Marshal was a great man, but he was still a man. He lived in a specific time and place. He was shaped by his culture and his circumstances. He made the best choices he could, given who he was and where he was. That is what makes his example so powerful. William was not superhuman. He was not blessed with abilities beyond ordinary mortals. He was a person like us, facing challenges like ours, trying to live a good life in a difficult world. If William could do it, perhaps we can too. Perhaps we can find the courage to stand up for what is right. Perhaps we can keep our promises even when it is hard. Perhaps we can serve others before ourselves. Perhaps we can be loyal and honest and wise. William Marshal shows us what is possible. He shows us the heights that human beings can reach. He inspires us to be better than we are. That is his greatest legacy, not his castles or his titles or his victories. His greatest legacy is his example. 800 years after his death, William Marshal still has something to teach us. We have spoken much about chivalry in this story. We have said that William Marshal embodied the chivalric ideal, but what exactly was chivalry? What did it mean to be a chivalrous knight? The word chivalry comes from the French word chevalier, which means horseman or knight. At its most basic level, chivalry was simply the culture of mounted warriors. It was how knights thought about themselves and their role in society. But chivalry was more than just a job description. It was a code of conduct. It was a set of values. It was an ideal that knights were supposed to live up to. The chivalric code had several components. Let us examine them one by one. First, there was prowess. A knight was supposed to be skilled in combat. He was supposed to be strong and brave and effective in battle. Prowess was the foundation of knighthood. Without it, nothing else mattered. William Marshal had prowess in abundance. His tournament record proved it. His performance in battle confirmed it. He was one of the finest warriors of his age. Second, there was loyalty. A knight was supposed to be faithful to his lord. He was supposed to keep his oaths and honour his commitments. Loyalty bound the feudal system together. Without it, society would collapse. William Marshal was famous for his loyalty. He served his kings through thick and thin. He never broke his word. He was the model of a faithful vassal. Third, there was generosity. A knight was supposed to be open-handed. He was supposed to share his wealth with others. He was supposed to reward his followers and support those in need. William Marshal was generous. He gave gifts to his retainers. He founded religious houses. He supported the poor. He used his wealth for the benefit of others. Fourth, there was courtesy. A knight was supposed to be polite and well-mannered. He was supposed to treat others with respect. He was supposed to know how to behave in noble company. William Marshal was courteous. He knew how to conduct himself in any situation. He was welcome in any court. He charmed everyone he met. Fifth, there was honour. A knight was supposed to care about his reputation. He was supposed to avoid anything shameful or disgraceful. He was supposed to defend his good name against all attacks. William Marshal guarded his honour jealously. When accused of improper behaviour with the young king's wife, he demanded trial by combat to clear his name. He would not let slanders go unanswered. Sixth, there was mercy. A knight was supposed to show compassion to the defeated. He was supposed to spare those who surrendered. He was supposed to treat prisoners with respect. William Marshal showed mercy. He spared Richard's life at Le Mans. He offered generous terms to the rebels after the Battle of Lincoln. He did not take revenge on his enemies. These 6 qualities, prowess, loyalty, generosity, courtesy, honour and mercy, formed the core of the chivalric code. A knight who possessed all of them was considered perfect. A knight who lacked any of them was considered flawed. William Marshal came closer to this ideal than almost anyone else. He possessed all 6 qualities in abundance. He was the living embodiment of what a knight should be. But chivalry was not just a personal code, it was also a social system. It defined relationships between people. It established rules for how different groups should interact. Knights owed certain duties to their lords. They owed military service, they owed counsel and advice, they owed loyalty and support. Lords owed certain duties to their knights. They owed protection. They owed rewards for good service. They owed justice and fair treatment. These mutual obligations held feudal society together. They created bonds of trust and dependence. They made cooperation possible in a violent and uncertain world. William Marshal understood this system perfectly. He knew what he owed to his lords. He knew what they owed to him. He navigated these relationships with skill and integrity. Chivalry also governed relationships between knights and other groups. Knights were supposed to protect the weak, especially women, children, and the poor. They were supposed to defend the church and support the clergy. They were supposed to fight for justice and oppose tyranny. These ideals were often honoured more in the breach than in the observance. Many knights were brutal and oppressive. They exploited the weak rather than protecting them. They served their own interests rather than justice. But the ideals remained powerful. They shaped how people thought about knighthood. They provided a standard against which knights could be judged. William Marshal lived up to these ideals more than most. He protected those who depended on him. He supported the church. He fought for what he believed was right. Chivalry also had a romantic dimension. Knights were supposed to serve ladies. They were supposed to perform deeds of valour to win a lady's favour. They were supposed to be inspired by love to greater achievements. This aspect of chivalry, often called courtly love, was particularly prominent in the literature of William's time. Poets and storytellers celebrated knights who devoted themselves to beautiful ladies. They told tales of love and adventure, of quests and tournaments, of passion and devotion. William Marshal lived in this culture. He participated in tournaments where ladies watched and cheered. He moved in courts where poetry and music celebrated romantic love. But William's own life was not particularly romantic, at least not in the literary sense. His marriage to Isabel de Clare was a practical arrangement. There is no evidence that he was driven by passionate love for any woman. The rumours about William and the young king's wife may have been attempts to fit him into the courtly love pattern. A great knight should have a great love. If William did not have one, perhaps people invented one for him. Whether or not these rumours were true, they remind us that chivalry was not just reality, it was also imagination. It was a set of stories that people told about themselves and their world. William Marshal became part of these stories. His life was turned into legend. The history of William Marshal presented him as the perfect knight, the embodiment of all chivalric virtues. This legendary William Marshal may not have been exactly the same as the real one. The biography smoothed over his flaws and emphasized his virtues. It made him into an ideal rather than a person. But legends have their own truth. The legendary William Marshal represented what people wanted to believe about knighthood. He showed them their own values reflected back at them. He gave them a hero to admire and emulate. This is why William Marshal matters. He was not just a historical figure. He was a symbol. He represented the best that his culture could imagine. He gave meaning to the concept of chivalry. When we think about medieval knights, we think about figures like William Marshal. He has shaped our understanding of what knighthood meant. He has influenced how we imagine the Middle Ages. This influence extends far beyond academic history. It reaches into popular culture. It shapes movies and books and games. It affects how we tell stories about heroes and honour. William Marshal is part of our cultural heritage. He is one of the figures through whom we understand the past. He connects us to a world that is gone but not forgotten. The story of William Marshal has inspired countless works of fiction and entertainment. Writers and artists have been drawn to his remarkable life. They have found in him a hero worthy of their talents. Historical novels have told William's story in vivid detail. Authors have imagined his thoughts and feelings. They have brought his world to life for modern readers. Elizabeth Chadwick, a popular historical novelist, has written extensively about William Marshal. Her books follow his career from youth to old age. They portray him as a complex and compelling character. They have introduced him to thousands of readers who might never have encountered him otherwise. Other novelists have featured William as a character in their stories. He appears in books about the Plantagenet kings. He appears in tales of medieval adventure. He has become a familiar figure in historical fiction. Television has also discovered William Marshal. Documentary programs have told his story. They have used dramatic recreations to bring his life to the screen. They have interviewed historians who explain his significance. These documentaries have reached wide audiences. They have made William Marshal known to people who do not read history books. They have spread awareness of his achievements. Feature films have not yet told William's story in a major way. This is surprising, given how cinematic his life was. His adventures would make excellent material for a movie. Perhaps someday a filmmaker will take on the challenge. Perhaps we will see William Marshal on the big screen, charging into battle, fighting in tournaments, serving his kings. It would be a story worth telling. Video games have drawn on the medieval world that William inhabited. Games set in the Middle Ages often feature knights and tournaments, castles and battles. They allow players to experience something like William's world. Some games have even featured William Marshal as a character. He appears in historical strategy games. He appears in role-playing games set in medieval England. Players can interact with him, fight alongside him, or even play as him. These games introduce William to younger audiences. They make history interactive and engaging. They show that the past can be exciting and relevant. William Marshal has also inspired works of art. Painters have depicted scenes from his life. Sculptors have created images of him. Artists have been drawn to his dramatic story. The effigy on William's tomb in the Temple Church is itself a work of art. It shows him as a knight in armour, peaceful in death. It has been photographed and reproduced countless times. It has become the iconic image of William Marshal. Music has also paid tribute to William. Folk songs have celebrated his deeds. Composers have written pieces inspired by his life. His story has been set to music in various forms. All of this cultural production keeps William Marshal alive. It ensures that his story continues to be told. It connects new generations to his legacy. But popular culture also shapes how we understand William. The novels and films and games present particular interpretations of his character. They emphasize certain aspects of his life and downplay others. This is inevitable. Any retelling of history involves choices. Authors and artists must decide what to include and what to leave out. They must imagine thoughts and feelings that the sources do not record. The result is that we have many William Marshals. There is the historical William, known from medieval sources. There is the legendary William, celebrated in the history of William Marshal. There is the fictional William, created by novelists and screenwriters. These different Williams are not identical. They overlap and diverge. They agree on the basic facts but differ on interpretation and emphasis. This multiplicity is not a problem. It is a sign of William's richness as a subject. He is complex enough to support many different portrayals. He is interesting enough to inspire many different artists. The challenge for us is to hold these different Williams together. We should enjoy the fictional versions while remembering that they are fiction. We should appreciate the legendary accounts while recognizing their biases. We should seek out the historical evidence while acknowledging its limitations. By doing this, we can come to know William Marshal as fully as possible. We can appreciate both the man and the myth. We can understand why he has fascinated people for 800 years. As we come to the end of our journey through William Marshal's life, let us pause to consider what we can learn from him. What lessons does his story offer for us today? The first lesson is about perseverance. William faced setbacks and disappointments throughout his life. He was nearly executed as a child. He was dismissed from the young king's service in disgrace. He was driven into semi-exile by King John. Again and again, he faced adversity. But William never gave up. He kept going. He found ways to overcome his obstacles. He turned setbacks into comebacks. He persevered until he achieved his goals. This is a lesson we can all apply. Life is full of difficulties. We all face failures and disappointments. The question is how we respond to them. William Marshal shows us that perseverance pays off. If we keep trying, if we refuse to quit, we can overcome almost anything. Success often comes to those who simply refuse to give up. The second lesson is about integrity. William was known for keeping his word. He was trusted because he was trustworthy. His reputation for honesty was one of his greatest assets. In our world, integrity can seem old-fashioned. We are surrounded by people who lie and cheat and break their promises. It can seem naive to insist on honesty. But William Marshal shows us that integrity has practical value. People wanted to work with him because they could trust him. His honesty opened doors that would have been closed to a less reliable man. Integrity is not just morally right, it is also strategically smart. In the long run, honest people tend to do better than dishonest ones. Trust is a valuable resource, and integrity is how we build it. The third lesson is about loyalty. William was faithful to his lords even when it was difficult. He served them through good times and bad. He did not abandon them when things got hard. Loyalty is another quality that can seem outdated. We live in a world of short-term thinking where people switch jobs and relationships frequently. Long-term commitment can seem like a trap, but William Marshal shows us the power of loyalty. His faithfulness to his kings earned him rewards and opportunities. His reputation for loyalty made him valuable to everyone who knew him. Loyalty also gives life meaning. Having something to be loyal to, whether a person, an institution, or a cause, gives us purpose. It connects us to something larger than ourselves. The fourth lesson is about service. William spent his life serving others. He served his lords. He served his country. He served the ideals of chivalry. In our individualistic age, service can seem like a sacrifice. We are told to pursue our own goals, to maximize our own happiness, to put ourselves first. But William Marshal shows us that service can be fulfilling. He found meaning and satisfaction in serving others. His life of service was also a life of achievement and honour. Service does not mean being a doormat. William served his lords, but he also spoke his mind and defended his interests. Service and self-respect can coexist. The fifth lesson is about growth. William started with nothing and became one of the most powerful men in England. He rose through his own efforts, developing his skills and seizing opportunities. This is an inspiring example of what is possible. William shows us that our origins do not determine our destiny. With talent and effort, we can rise far beyond where we started. But growth requires work. William trained hard to become a great fighter. He learned from his experiences. He adapted to changing circumstances. He never stopped improving. If we want to grow, we must be willing to put in the effort. We must practice our skills. We must learn from our mistakes. We must keep pushing ourselves to improve. The sixth lesson is about balance. William was a warrior, but he was also a builder. He fought battles, but he also governed estates. He served his lords, but he also looked after his family. William did not define himself by just one role. He was multidimensional. He developed different aspects of himself at different times in his life. This balance made William more effective. His skills as a fighter helped him in politics. His experience in governance helped him in war. His different abilities reinforced each other. We can learn from this. We should not limit ourselves to just one identity or one set of skills. We should develop multiple dimensions of ourselves. We should seek balance in our lives. The seventh lesson is about timing. William knew when to act and when to wait. He knew when to speak and when to stay silent. He knew when to fight and when to make peace. This sense of timing was crucial to his success. William did not rush into things. He assessed situations carefully. He chose his moments wisely. Good timing is a skill that can be developed. It requires patience and observation. It requires understanding the rhythms of events. It requires knowing when the moment is right. The eighth lesson is about relationships. William built strong relationships throughout his life. He cultivated friendships. He earned trust. He created networks of allies and supporters. These relationships were essential to his success. William did not achieve greatness alone. He achieved it with the help of others. His ability to build and maintain relationships was one of his greatest strengths. We live in a connected world. Our success depends on our relationships with others. We should invest in building strong connections. We should treat people well. We should be the kind of person others want to work with. The ninth lesson is about legacy. William thought about what he would leave behind. He built castles that would outlast him. He founded towns that would grow and prosper. He raised children who would carry on his name. Thinking about legacy gives life perspective. It helps us focus on what really matters. It encourages us to think beyond our immediate concerns. What legacy will we leave? What will we be remembered for? These are questions worth asking. They can guide our choices and shape our priorities. The 10th lesson is about meaning. William found meaning in service, in loyalty, in honour. He had a code that gave his life purpose. He knew what he stood for and what he was willing to fight for. Meaning is essential to a good life. Without it, we drift. We feel empty and lost. We go through the motions without really living. William Marshal shows us that meaning can be found in commitment to something larger than ourselves. Whether it is a cause, a community, a set of values, or a way of life, having something to believe in gives life depth and significance. These lessons from William Marshal are not just historical curiosities. They are practical wisdom that we can apply today. They are insights into how to live a good and successful life. William lived 800 years ago in a world very different from ours, but human nature has not changed. The challenges we face, the choices we make, the values we hold, these are timeless. William's example can still guide us. Throughout his long life, William Marshal moved through many places. He lived in castles and manors across England, Wales, Ireland, and France. He travelled to the Holy Land and back. He knew the geography of medieval Europe as few others did. Let us take a journey through some of the places that were important in William's life. Let us visit, in our imagination, the sites where his story unfolded. We begin in England, in the region where William was born. The exact location of his birth is not certain, but it was probably somewhere in the west of England, in the lands held by his father John Marshal. This was a landscape of rolling hills and fertile valleys. Small villages dotted the countryside. Manor houses and parish churches marked the centres of local life. It was a quiet, rural world, far from the great events of history. But even this peaceful landscape bore the scars of the Anarchy. Castles had been built and destroyed. Villages had been burned. The Civil War had touched every corner of England. William's earliest memories would have been shaped by this troubled time. He would have known fear and uncertainty. He would have seen the effects of war on ordinary people. Newbury Castle, where William was held hostage, was one of the places that marked his childhood. This was where his father defied King Stephen. This was where William's life hung in the balance. The castle at Newbury no longer exists. It was destroyed long ago, but the town of Newbury still stands, a thriving community in Berkshire. Visitors can walk the streets where, 800 years ago, a little boy waited to learn if he would live or die. From England, we move to Normandy, where William received his training as a knight. The Château de Tancarville, where he lived in the household of William de Tancarville, was his home for several formative years. Tancarville sits on the banks of the River Seine, not far from the sea. It was a strategic location, controlling traffic on the great river. The castle was large and impressive, a fitting home for one of the greatest lords of Normandy. Here, young William learned the arts of war. He practised with sword and lance. He rode horses across the Norman countryside. He absorbed the culture of chivalry that would shape his entire life. The castle at Tancarville has been rebuilt many times over the centuries. The structure that stands today is not the one William knew, but the site remains, overlooking the Seine, a reminder of where the greatest knight began his journey. From Normandy, William's tournament career took him across France. He fought in countless locations, from Champagne to Anjou, from Maine to Flanders. The tournament circuit covered a vast territory. These tournaments were held in open fields, in meadows and pastures that could accommodate hundreds of mounted knights. The locations were chosen for their accessibility and their space. They were temporary battlefields, transformed for a few days into arenas of combat. Few traces of these tournament sites remain. The fields have returned to their normal uses. The temporary structures have long since vanished. But the memory of what happened there lives on in the records and stories of the time. The Holy Land, where William fulfilled his crusading vow, was the most distant place he ever visited. Jerusalem, the holiest city in Christendom, was his ultimate destination. William would have approached Jerusalem with awe and reverence. This was the city where Jesus had walked. This was where he had been crucified and buried. This was where he had risen from the dead. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, built over the site of Jesus' tomb, was the goal of William's pilgrimage. Here he laid the young king's cloak, fulfilling the promise he had made to his dying Lord. Jerusalem today is a very different city from the one William knew. It has been conquered and reconquered many times. The Crusader kingdom fell just a few years after William's visit, but the Church of the Holy Sepulchre still stands, still drawing pilgrims from around the world. Returning to England, we come to the places where William built his power as Earl of Pembroke. His lands were scattered across the realm, but certain locations were particularly important. Pembroke Castle, in Wales, was one of William's greatest strongholds. He strengthened and expanded it, making it one of the most formidable fortresses in the land. The castle sits on a rocky promontory, surrounded on three sides by water. Its position made it almost impregnable. Attackers would have to assault it from a narrow approach, under fire from the defenders above. The Great Round Keep at Pembroke is one of the finest examples of Norman military architecture. It rises high above the surrounding walls, dominating the landscape. It was built during William's time, a testament to his power and his vision. Pembroke Castle still stands today. It is one of the best preserved medieval castles in Wales. Visitors can walk through its gates, climb its towers, and stand where William Marshal once stood. In Ireland, William's lands centred on Leinster, the southeastern province of the island. This was wild and contested territory, far from the centres of English power. William built castles and founded towns to secure his Irish holdings. He brought settlers from England and Wales. He established the structures of English rule in a land that had known only Irish customs. New Ross, the town William founded on the River Barrow, became an important port. Ships sailed from there to England and France, carrying goods and passengers. The town grew and prospered under William's guidance. New Ross still exists today. It is a thriving town in County Wexford. The medieval street plan that William established can still be traced. The town is a living legacy of his time in Ireland. Chepstow Castle, on the border between England and Wales, was another of William's important holdings. This castle controlled a key crossing of the River Wye. It was strategically vital for anyone who wanted to dominate the Welsh marches. William expanded Chepstow significantly. He added new towers and walls. He made it into a residence fit for one of the greatest lords in the land. Chepstow Castle is now a ruin, but an impressive one. Its walls still stand overlooking the river. Visitors can explore its chambers and imagine the life that once filled them. Caversham, near Reading, was where William spent his final days. This was a peaceful manor beside the River Thames. It was a fitting place for an old warrior to rest. Here, William prepared for death. He put his affairs in order. He said goodbye to his family and friends. He made his peace with God. The manor at Caversham no longer exists. The site has been absorbed into the modern town of Reading, but the memory of what's happened there endures. Finally, we come to the Temple Church in London, where William was buried. This was the headquarters of the Knights Templar in England. It was a fitting resting place for a man who had joined the order on his deathbed. The Temple Church is a remarkable building. Its round nave, modelled on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, is unique in England. It was built to remind the Templars of the holy city they had sworn to defend. William's effigy lies in the nave of the Temple Church. It shows him as a knight in armour, his hands clasped in prayer. It is one of the finest medieval tomb effigies in England. The Temple Church was badly damaged during the Second World War. German bombs destroyed much of the building, but it was carefully restored after the war. William's effigy survived and can still be seen today. Visitors to the Temple Church can stand beside William Marshal's tomb. They can look upon the face of the greatest knight. They can pay their respects to a man who lived 800 years ago, but whose story still resonates. These places, scattered across England, Wales, Ireland, France and the Holy Land, trace the geography of William Marshal's life. They remind us that history happened in real locations. They connect us to the physical world that William knew. Visiting these places, or even just learning about them, brings William's story to life. It makes him more real, more tangible. It helps us understand the world he lived in and the challenges he faced. William Marshal was not just a knight and a statesman. He was also a husband and a father. His family was central to his life. Let us take some time to learn about the people who were closest to him. Isabel de Clare, William's wife, was one of the most remarkable women of her age. She was the daughter of Richard de Clare, known as Strongbow, the famous conqueror of Ireland. When Strongbow died, Isabel inherited his vast estates. Isabel was one of the richest heiresses in England. Her lands included the earldom of Pembroke, extensive properties in Ireland, and estates in Normandy and England. Whoever married her would become one of the most powerful lords in the realm. King Richard I gave Isabel to William Marshal as a reward for his loyal service. It was an extraordinary gift. William went from being a landless knight to being an earl overnight. But Isabel was more than just a source of wealth and status. She was a capable and intelligent woman. She managed the family's estates when William was away. She raised their children. She was a true partner in William's life. Isabel and William were married for about 30 years. They seem to have had a good relationship. The sources speak of them with respect and affection. Their marriage, which began as a political arrangement, appears to have become a genuine partnership. Isabel outlived William by about a year. She died in 1220, shortly after her husband. She was buried beside him in the Temple Church. Their effigies lie side by side, together in death as they were in life. William and Isabel had 10 children, 5 sons and 5 daughters. This was a large family, even by medieval standards. Let us meet each of them. William Marshal the Younger was the eldest son. He inherited his father's titles and estates. He became the 2nd Earl of Pembroke. The younger William was a capable man, though he never achieved his father's fame. He served King Henry III loyally. He helped to maintain the peace that his father had won. But the younger William had no children. When he died in 1231, the earldom passed to his brother Richard. Richard Marshal became the 3rd Earl of Pembroke. He was a skilled warrior, like his father. He fought in tournaments and in wars. But Richard clashed with King Henry III. He led a rebellion against the king's unpopular advisers. The conflict ended badly. Richard was wounded in battle in Ireland and died of his injuries in 1234. Richard also had no children. The earldom passed to his brother Gilbert. Gilbert Marshal became the 4th Earl of Pembroke. He was a tournament champion, continuing the family tradition. He was known for his skill and his courage. But Gilbert's life ended in tragedy. He was killed in a tournament accident in 1241. His horse fell on him, crushing him to death. He was only about 30 years old. Gilbert had no children either. The earldom passed to his brother Walter. Walter Marshal became the 5th Earl of Pembroke. He was the quietest of the brothers, less prominent in public affairs. He lived a relatively peaceful life. Walter died in 1245, also without children. The earldom passed to the last surviving brother, Anselm. Anselm Marshal became the 6th Earl of Pembroke, but he held the title for only a few weeks. He died in 1245, shortly after his brother Walter. Anselm had no children. With his death, the male line of the Marshal family came to an end. All 5 of William Marshal's sons had died without leaving male heirs. This was a remarkable and tragic extinction. The greatest knight in England had founded a dynasty that lasted only 1 generation. His sons, despite their abilities, failed to continue the family line. The earldom of Pembroke was divided among William's daughters and their descendants. The Marshal inheritance was scattered across multiple families. William's 5 daughters all made important marriages. They connected the Marshal family to the greatest houses of England and Europe. Matilda Marshal, the eldest daughter, married Hugh Bigod, Earl of Norfolk. Their descendants became one of the most powerful families in England. Isabel Marshal married Gilbert de Clare, Earl of Gloucester. Their descendants included kings and queens. The blood of William Marshal flowed through the royal houses of Europe. Sybil Marshal married William de Ferrers, Earl of Derby. Eva Marshal married William de Braouse. Joan Marshal married Warren de Montmorency. Through these daughters, William Marshal's legacy continued. His bloodline spread through the English nobility. His descendants shaped the history of the realm for generations. The extinction of the male line was a blow to the Marshal name, but the family's influence endured through the female line. William's blood continued to flow through the veins of the powerful and the great. This pattern of a great man's sons failing to continue his line while his daughters spread his legacy was not unusual in medieval times. Infant mortality was high. Many men died young, in war or in accidents. Continuing a family line was never guaranteed. William Marshal himself had risen from obscurity. His father had been a minor noble, not a great lord. William had built his own greatness through his own efforts. Perhaps it was fitting that his legacy should be spread widely rather than concentrated in a single line. William's influence touched many families, many regions, many aspects of English life. His legacy was diffuse but pervasive. The family of William Marshal reminds us that even the greatest individuals are part of larger networks. They are connected to parents and children, siblings and spouses. Their lives are intertwined with the lives of others. William's achievements were his own, but they were also shaped by his family. His father's position gave him his start. His wife's inheritance gave him his wealth. His children gave him a reason to build for the future. Understanding William's family helps us understand him. It shows us the context in which he lived. It reveals the relationships that mattered to him. Every great man has enemies. William Marshal was no exception. Throughout his life, he faced rivals and opponents who sought to bring him down. Understanding William's enemies helps us understand his achievements. It shows us the obstacles he had to overcome. It reveals the dangers he faced. Let us meet some of the people who opposed William Marshal. In his early years, William faced rivals at the court of William de Tancarville. The history of William Marshal tells us that he had enemies there who plotted against him. These were men who were threatened by William's close relationship with the great lord. We do not know the names of these early enemies. They were probably other young men, competing for favour and advancement. They saw William as a rival and tried to undermine him. William survived these early intrigues. He learned to navigate the dangerous waters of courtly politics. He developed the skills that would serve him throughout his life. During his time with the young king, William faced more serious opposition. There were men who resented his influence. They whispered against him. They spread rumours and accusations. The most damaging accusation was that William had an improper relationship with the young king's wife, Margaret of France. This charge, whether true or false, led to William's dismissal from the young king's household. We do not know who originated this accusation. It may have been jealous rivals. It may have been political enemies. It may have been people who simply wanted to see William fall. William demanded the right to clear his name through trial by combat. He offered to fight any 3 knights to prove his innocence. No one accepted his challenge, but the damage was done. William was forced to leave the court in disgrace. This episode shows how vulnerable even the greatest knight could be. Reputation was everything in medieval society. A whispered accusation could destroy a career. William's enemies knew this and used it against him. King John was perhaps William's most difficult opponent. John was not exactly an enemy. He was William's lord and William served him loyally. But John's suspicion and hostility made William's life miserable for years. John distrusted William because William had done homage to the King of France for his Norman lands. John saw this as disloyalty, even though it was a common practice. He never fully trusted William again. John demanded William's sons as hostages. He stripped William of offices and honours. He drove William into semi-exile. He made it clear that William was not welcome at court. William endured this treatment with patience. He did not rebel against John. He did not join the king's enemies. He remained loyal, even when loyalty brought him nothing but suffering. This patience eventually paid off. When John died, William was the obvious choice to serve as regent for the young Henry III. His years of faithful service, even in the face of royal hostility, had proven his worth. Prince Louis of France was William's enemy, in a more straightforward sense. Louis invaded England and claimed the throne. He was a foreign prince trying to conquer William's country. William opposed Louis with all his strength. He led the armies that defeated Louis at Lincoln and Sandwich. He drove the French prince out of England. But even with Louis, William showed his characteristic restraint. He offered generous terms for peace. He did not seek to humiliate or destroy his enemy. He wanted to end the conflict, not to prolong it. The rebel barons who supported Louis were also William's opponents. These were English lords who had turned against their king. They had invited a foreign prince to take the throne. William could have treated these rebels harshly. He could have executed them or stripped them of their lands. Many of his allies wanted him to do exactly that. But William chose mercy. He pardoned the rebels. He allowed them to return to their allegiance. He healed the wounds of civil war rather than deepening them. This approach won William more friends than enemies. Many of the former rebels became loyal supporters of the crown. They remembered William's generosity and repaid it with gratitude. Throughout his life, William faced opposition from those who envied his success. He was a self-made man who had risen from obscurity to greatness. This aroused resentment among those who felt they deserved better. William dealt with this envy by being consistently excellent. He outperformed his rivals. He proved his worth again and again. He gave his enemies no legitimate grounds for complaint. He also cultivated allies. William was skilled at building relationships. He made friends in high places. He created networks of support that protected him from his enemies. The story of William's enemies reminds us that success is never easy. There are always people who want to see us fail. There are always obstacles to overcome. William Marshal succeeded not because he had no enemies, but because he overcame them. He faced opposition with courage and skill. He turned rivals into allies when he could. He defeated those he could not convert. This is another lesson we can learn from William. Success requires dealing with opposition. We must be prepared to face enemies and rivals. We must develop the skills to overcome them. William Marshal served 5 kings of England. This is one of the most remarkable facts about his life. He maintained the trust of 5 different monarchs, each with his own personality and challenges. Let us look at William's relationship with each of these kings. Let us see how he adapted to different rulers and different circumstances. The first King William served was Henry II. Henry was one of the greatest kings in English history. He restored order after the Anarchy. He built a powerful legal system. He ruled a vast empire stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. William came into Henry's service late in the king's reign. Henry was already old and tired, worn down by conflicts with his sons. But he recognised William's worth and took him into his inner circle. William served Henry faithfully during the king's final troubled years. He fought for Henry against his rebellious sons. He stayed with Henry when others fled. He was there at the end, preparing the king's body for burial. Henry trusted William because William was trustworthy. In a world of treachery and betrayal, William's loyalty stood out. Henry knew he could rely on this knight, no matter what. The second King William served was Richard I, the Lionheart. Richard was a warrior king, famous for his courage and his skill in battle. He spent most of his reign fighting, either on crusade or in France. William's relationship with Richard began awkwardly. William had fought against Richard, defending Henry II. He had nearly killed Richard at Le Mans, but Richard forgave William. He recognised that William had been doing his duty, serving his lord faithfully. Richard admired this loyalty and wanted it for himself. Richard rewarded William generously. He gave William the hand of Isabel de Clare, making William one of the richest men in England. He trusted William to help govern the kingdom, while Richard was away on crusade. William served Richard loyally, just as he had served Henry. He managed his estates. He helped maintain order in England. He supported the king's interests. Richard and William were not close friends. Richard was often absent, and their personalities were different. But they respected each other. Richard trusted William, and William served Richard faithfully. The third king William served was John. This was the most difficult relationship of William's career. John was suspicious and paranoid. He trusted no one. He saw enemies everywhere. He treated even his loyal supporters with hostility. William tried to serve John as he had served Henry and Richard. He gave the king his loyalty. He offered advice and counsel. He did his duty. But John did not appreciate William's service. He resented William's independence. He suspected William's motives. He made William's life miserable. The conflict over William's Norman lands was particularly bitter. William had done homage to the King of France for those lands, a common practice that John saw as betrayal. John never forgave William for this. John demanded William's sons as hostages. He stripped William of offices. He drove William away from court. For years William lived in semi-exile, far from the centre of power. Through all of this, William remained loyal. He did not rebel against John. He did not join the king's enemies. He endured the injustice and waited for better times. When John died, William's patience was rewarded. He was chosen to serve as regent for the young Henry III. His years of faithful service, even in the face of royal hostility, had proven his worth. The fourth king William served was Henry III. Henry was just 9 years old when he became king. He was a child, unable to rule on his own. William became Henry's protector and guide. He governed the kingdom in Henry's name. He defended Henry against his enemies. He preserved Henry's throne. This was a different kind of service than William had given before. He was not just a loyal knight, he was the effective ruler of England. He made decisions that shaped the fate of the kingdom. William handled this responsibility with wisdom and restraint. He did not abuse his power. He did not try to make himself king. He served the young Henry faithfully, preparing the way for Henry to rule on his own. When William died, Henry was still a child, but the kingdom was at peace. The threats had been defeated. Henry would grow up to rule a stable and prosperous realm. The fifth king, William, was, in a sense, the institution of kingship itself. William believed in the monarchy. He believed that England needed a king. He dedicated his life to supporting the crown. This loyalty to the institution, not just to individual kings, was what made William's service so remarkable. He served good kings and bad kings. He served strong kings and weak kings. He served whoever wore the crown. This institutional loyalty was rare in medieval times. Most men were loyal to individuals, not to offices. They followed leaders they liked and abandoned those they did not. William was different. He understood that the kingdom needed stability. He understood that the crown was bigger than any individual who wore it. He served the monarchy because he believed in it. This is perhaps the deepest lesson of William's career. Loyalty to institutions, to principles, to something larger than ourselves, gives life meaning and purpose. It connects us to the past and the future. It makes us part of something that will outlast us. William Marshal served 5 kings because he served the crown. He was loyal to the institution of monarchy, not just to the men who happened to be kings. This institutional loyalty was the foundation of his remarkable career. We have spoken of William's death before, but let us return to it now. Let us dwell on those final days when the greatest knight prepared to meet his Maker. It was the spring of 1219. William was at his manor of Caversham near Reading. He had been ill for some time. He knew that the end was approaching. William faced death with the same courage he had shown throughout his life. He did not rage against his fate. He did not cling desperately to life. He accepted what was coming and prepared himself. There were practical matters to attend to. William had to arrange for the succession of his titles and estates. He had to provide for his family and his retainers. He had to settle his debts and fulfill his obligations. William handled these matters with his usual efficiency. He gave instructions. He distributed his possessions. He made sure that everyone who depended on him would be taken care of. There were also spiritual matters to consider. William was a devout man in his own way. He believed in God and in the teachings of the Church. He wanted to die well, to make his peace with heaven. William had made a vow years before to join the Knights Templar on his deathbed. Now he fulfilled that vow. He summoned the Master of the Temple in England. He took the vows of the order. He put on the white mantle with the red cross. This was a significant act. The Templars were the elite warriors of Christendom. They had dedicated their lives to defending the Holy Land. By joining them even at the last moment, William was affirming his commitment to the ideals they represented. William also made his confession. He told the priest his sins. He received absolution. He was shriven, his soul cleansed and ready for judgment. The final days were peaceful. William was surrounded by his family and friends. His wife Isabel was there. His sons and daughters were there. His closest companions and retainers were there. They talked. They prayed. They said their farewells. It was a time of sadness, but also of love. William was not dying alone. He was dying among those who cared for him. One story from these final days has become famous. William's knights asked him what would become of them after he was gone. They worried about their futures. They wondered who would protect them. William reassured them. He said that he'd made arrangements. He said that they would be taken care of. He told them not to worry. But then one of the knights raised a more difficult question. He pointed out that William had taken many things during his life. Horses and armour and ransoms from defeated opponents. The knight suggested that William should give back some of these things to make amends before he died. William's response was sharp. He said that if the clergy expected him to give back everything he had won, then they were asking too much. He said that he had won those things fairly in honest combat. He said that he would not give them back. This was a surprising answer from a man on his deathbed, but it was honest. William had lived his life by a certain code. He had fought and won according to the rules of his society. He was not going to repudiate all of that at the last moment. William trusted in God's mercy. He believed that God understood the life of a knight. He believed that God would judge him fairly, taking into account the world he had lived in and the choices he had faced. On May 14th, 1219, William Marshal died. He was about 73 years old. He had lived longer than most men of his time. He had achieved more than almost anyone. His body was prepared for burial. He was dressed in the white mantle of the Templars. He was laid in a coffin and carried to London. The funeral procession must have been impressive. William had been one of the most powerful men in England. His death was a significant event. People would have lined the roads to watch the procession pass. William was buried in the Temple Church, just as he had requested. This was the headquarters of the Knights Templar in England. It was a fitting resting place for a man who had joined the order on his deathbed. The Temple Church is a remarkable building. Its round nave was modelled on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. It was designed to remind the Templars of the holy city they had sworn to defend. William's tomb was placed in the nave among the tombs of other distinguished knights. An effigy was carved to mark his resting place. It showed him as a knight in armour, his hands clasped in prayer. The effigy is one of the finest medieval tomb sculptures in England. It captures William as he wished to be remembered. A knight, a warrior, a man of faith. The Temple Church has survived for 800 years. It has been damaged and restored. It has seen wars and revolutions, but it still stands, and William's effigy still lies within it. Visitors to the Temple Church can stand beside William Marshal's tomb. They can look upon the face of the greatest knight. They can pay their respects to a man who lived so long ago, but whose story still inspires. The death of William Marshal marked the end of an era. He was the last of the great knights who had served Henry II. He was a link to a vanishing world, but his legacy lived on. His example continued to inspire. His story continued to be told. 800 years later, we are still talking about William Marshal.